Hi again everyone. In our last video we went through questions 1 through 10 of this sample test 2, and in this video we'll go through questions 11 through 20. So question 11 says open market operations are choice A, buying and selling of existing government bonds in markets by Bank of Canada. We will explore the idea of open market operation. That's what exactly open market operation is. Bank of Canada buys bonds from the commercial banks and keeps them in cash in return to increase reserves in the commercial bank's hands so that money supply can increase. And whenever Bank of Canada wants to reduce money supply, it just sells pre-existing government bonds to commercial banks and in return takes away cash reserves from them. In that way banks will have less money to lend. So choice A correctly defines open market operation, but let's not stop here. Let's keep moving on because there might be more than one correct answer. B says issuing new bonds in markets by the Bank of Canada to borrow money. That is not what open market operations is. Bank of Canada never issues bonds to generate funds because fact of the matter is Bank of Canada has the power to print money, so it actually doesn't have to borrow from anybody. It can just print its own money and circulate the money to pay its bills. So B cannot be a right answer. C, the action of Bank of Canada that are directly used to generate money for the government of Canada. Bank of Canada doesn't generate money for government of Canada. Bank of Canada increases or decreases the money supply in the economy to keep the Canadian economy stable. So I cannot take this. D, only the selling of new government securities in order to change the money supply. Bank of Canada does not sell only the new government securities. It can sell pre-existing government securities that Government of Canada issued maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Those long-term bonds are all over the economy, and therefore most of the big banks and Bank of Canada, they own those bonds because they bought it historically from Government of Canada, and now they can resell those existing bonds between each other. They don't have to be the new government bonds. So I cannot take this. A looks like the correct answer. Question 12. If Bank of Canada sells $10 of securities through a commercial bank, when the reserve requirement is 10%, the money supply may ultimately increase or decrease or whatever. So if Bank of Canada is selling $10 worth of securities or bonds to a bank, it will take away $10 of cash from that commercial bank in return. So the commercial banks will have $10 less to lend to, and that means money supply will decrease. But we know from the concept of multiplier that eventually the total amount of change in money supply is whatever amount of reserve was changed or whatever was drained out of the banking system by a central bank times the money multiplier, which was 1 over the desired reserve ratio, which turns out to be 10% in this question. 10% means 0.1, and if we use our calculator, it will turn out to be $100 because 1 over 0.1 would give me a value of 10, and 10 times 10 is $100 negative. So this is going to be a decrease of money supply by $100. Question 13. The interest rate that the Bank of Canada pays when commercial banks deposit their cash as reserve is called what? So when commercial banks keep their money in the Bank of Canada under a reserve account, We call those reserve accounts, of course. Bank of Canada pays them interest, and that interest rate is actually called the deposit rate. So this is just a definition that we have to remember. By the way, if the question was asking you the interest rate that commercial banks pay to Bank of Canada when Bank of Canada lends them money, we call that interest rate the bank rate. This is the rate that Bank of Canada charges when other banks borrow money from Bank of Canada. Question 14. Open market operations. Choice A are purchase and sale of existing Canadian government bonds by Bank of Canada. Yeah, that is right. But let's keep reading the answers, because there might be more than one answer, or there might be an answer which is much more accurate and precise than this. We never know. B. Inject reserves into the banking system when the Bank of Canada buys bonds from chartered banks. So yes, open market operations inject cash or reserve into the commercial banks when Bank of Canada buys bonds from them. So this is also correct. C says open market operations reduce reserves in the banking system when Bank of Canada sells bonds to the chartered banks. So in this case, Bank of Canada sells bonds to chartered banks, and in return chartered banks have to give away their cash, some of their cash, to Bank of Canada, in which case reserves will reduce. So C is also correct. So D is our correct answer, which says all of the above are true. Question 15. To save the economy from a recession, what can be done? A. The Bank of Canada could decrease commercial banks' reserves. Oops, that will not help, because decreasing commercial banks' reserves mean commercial banks have less cash reserve to lend from, and money supply will decrease, and less money supply will cause the economy to go down into further recession. So we cannot take choice A. Choice B says the Bank of Canada could increase the overnight interest rates. So if Bank of Canada increases interest rates, then higher interest rates make borrowing difficult, so people will borrow less to buy cars, borrow less and less to expand their businesses. So investment, consumption, etc. will reduce, and economy will fall further into recession. So B will not help. C. To save economy from recession, the Bank of Canada could decrease the overnight interest rate. This makes sense because decreasing interest rates means now businesses and consumers will find it easier to borrow money because interest rates are lower, and therefore they might buy more cars, houses, or swipe their credit cards more often, and economy might experience more consumption and investment. So C might be a right answer. Let's see what D and E says. D says the Bank of Canada could increase commercial banks' reserves. So D would actually help too, because in this case the Bank of Canada gives commercial banks more reserves. Commercial banks can lend more money from these reserves, and more money will cause more consumption and investment in the economy. So D is also a correct answer. So looks like I was wrong at the first glance. Both C and D are correct answers, and therefore I have to mark E as the correct choice for this question. 16. There are zero excess reserves in all banks, and required reserve ratio is, or desired reserve ratio is 20%. Suppose this required means desired reserve ratio is 20%. If a check for 100,000 is deposited in bank XYZ, excess reserve at bank XYZ is equal to how much as an immediate effect of the deposit. So this XYZ bank had been satisfying the desired reserve ratio all along, So there is no excess reserve. It has been keeping only 20% of all its deposit as reserve. Now all of a sudden there's a change in deposits. Suppose this is XYZ's balance table, assets and liabilities. On the liability side, there's an addition of $100,000 of deposits. So immediate effect is this bank keeps the entire money as reserve. Now notice that out of this total reserve, the immediate effect is $100,000 of total reserve until and unless it finds new borrowers to lend from this excess, from this total reserve. However, notice that out of this $100,000, $20,000 should be a change in its desired reserve, because deposit increased by 100,000 means desired reserve has increased by 20% of this 100,000. So this is desired reserve change, desired reserve, plus the remaining 80,000 is going to be this bank's new excess reserve. So instead of writing this 100,000, we could also write it as 20,000 desired reserve and 80,000 excess reserve. So these two guys are going to be equal to this total 100,000. So we can pick to fill out this blank, we can say that the change in the new excess reserve is positive 80,000 in this case. So question 17 is based on this table 1. It says in table 1, bank 1 is subject to a desired reserve ratio of what percentage? So this table is already telling me that this bank's desired reserve is exactly 100,000, and this bank's total deposit is 500,000. So the ratio of its desired reserve to deposit is going to be 100,000 divided by 500,000. As simple as that. So this is 1/5. If you use your calculator, this will turn out to be 20%. So I'll mark D as the correct answer here. Question 18. When banks have positive excess reserves which they do not want to hold, this indicate that, well, if banks are having some excess reserve that they do not want to hold, that means they want to lend that excess reserve. So this simply means banks can expand their loans. A says banks must contract their deposits. No, that's not true. Excess reserve doesn't mean you have to cut your deposits. C says nothing will happen. That is also not right. And D says there will be a run on the banks. If you have excess reserve, chances are your depositors will be more assured that you have more cash, so they don't want to feel like running to your bank to withdraw their cash. So it's the opposite of D. 19. Other things unchanged as price of bonds increase. A. Interest rates earned on bonds increase. That is not right, because we know that price of bonds and interest rates on bonds are oppositely related, because every bond has a fixed face value. Say that face value is $1,000, and today's price of bond depends on the market demand and supply of bonds. And if today's price is only $900 for the same face value bond, then the interest rate, which is also called rate of return on bond, is going to be your profit when the bond matures. You get this face value, 1000 minus 900, 100 over the purchase price 900 times 100%, and these, if you use your calculator, will turn out to be about 11.1%. But if price of bonds goes down to say $500, face value remains unchanged, face value is always fixed. This is the promised amount the issuer will pay you when the bond matures. In that case, your rate of return is 1000 minus 500, which is equal to 500 over the purchase price 500 times 100%. And here the rate of return or interest rate turns out to be 100%. So you can see that when price of bond is decreasing, interest rate earned on bond is increasing, and vice versa. So other things unchanged. As price of bonds increases, the interest rate on bonds would decrease. That's what we saw here. If price of bonds increase from say 500 to 900, interest rate decreases from 100% to 11%, so on and so forth. Question 20. Given the list of assets below, which is most liquid? Liquidity means how easily something can be converted into cash. A. $500 worth of General Motors common stock. That means shares. Shares are pretty easy to be sold, but they typically take a few days or so. So we don't know which one we'll pick. Let's keep reading. B. $500 worth of 10-year General Motors bonds. Well, stock markets look like maybe a little more liquid than bonds, but let's keep reading. C. $500 worth of maple syrup. Maple syrup might take quite a bit of time to be sold, unlike financial assets. D. A $500 checking account balance. To me, this $500 checking account balance looks very liquid, because if you have a debit card, you can just swipe your card, and within less than a minute you can spend this $500 just like cash. So I'll take part B as my answer. So I'll come back with the rest of the questions maybe in the next video. For now, I'll say bye to you. I hope this is helping. Bye.